Welcome to the organization and scoring of the VariEP Student Teaching Form module. Completion of this module will require approximately 15 minutes. In this module, you will learn about how the VariEP Student Teaching Form is organized. You will also learn how the VariEP Student Teaching Form is scored. Finally, we will discuss how to differentiate between levels of performance. The evaluation form has two major sections: pedagogy, which evaluates the methods and practice of teaching, and professional dispositions, which evaluates behaviors towards P12 students, other stakeholders, motivation, professional development, and personal growth. Both are important for the effectiveness of any teacher. The pedagogy rubric uses measurable criteria with operational terms to articulate what effective teaching and learning looks like. It is divided into 4 sections: planning for instruction and assessment, what and how the student teacher prepares to teach lessons, instructional delivery, what and how the student teacher delivers lessons, assessment, how the student teacher evaluates the work of learners and how that informs future instruction, and analysis of teaching, how a student teacher connects his or her own teaching to theory and research. The professional dispositions section includes professional actions and behaviors, such as punctuality, collaboration, and response to feedback. This section of the VariEP Student Teaching Form evaluates professional characteristics that are essential for effective teachers. For each individual row, a student teacher may earn a score of 3 to 0. Scores are arranged from right to left, with the highest on the left and the lowest on the right. A score of 3 indicates that a student teacher exceeds expectations. A score of 2 means he or she meets expectations. A score of 1 means a student teacher is emerging in the skill. And finally, a 0 means the student teacher does not meet expectations. These ratings will be defined more thoroughly over the course of the next several slides. Starting with the does not meet expectations designation, a score of 0 means the student teacher does not meet the minimum acceptable level of performance for that row. There are many reasons a student teacher may earn a score of 0. He or she may struggle with that specific area, or may not have had sufficient opportunities to demonstrate his or her abilities in that area. For example, in the assessment section, in the data-driven decision-making row, a 0 score would be earned if a student teacher does not use the data to design instruction and assessment. Remember, performance on this row is essential to being an effective teacher. Therefore, not applicable is not an option. Any score of 0 alerts the cooperating teacher and the university supervisor of an obligation to support that student teacher. This includes finding ways to access the materials or provide opportunities for experiences necessary to demonstrate his or her competence. Moving up the scale, the student teacher earns a score of 1, or emerging, if he or she does not perform at an acceptable level and needs improvement or requires support to perform at an acceptable level. It is expected that most student teachers will earn a 1 in some areas, especially at the midterm evaluation. Like a 0, a score of 1 alerts the team that the student teacher needs to focus on that specific area, and both the cooperating teacher and the university supervisor need to provide resources and support to facilitate that student teacher's growth. Remember, the VariEP Student Teaching Form is designed to be an accurate reflection of how student teachers perform at the middle and at the end of their student teaching experiences. The intention of the form is to provide formative feedback to the student teacher. Raters are strongly discouraged from lowering scores at the midterm conference or inflating scores at the final conference simply to show growth. Although a student teacher will likely show growth in some areas assessed by the form, it is expected a student teacher will earn consistent scores in some rows. Returning to the form, a student teacher earns a score of 2 on a row if he or she met an acceptable level of performance, as described. A Level 2 score means a student teacher is proficient at a given skill and has demonstrated that he or she is able to independently use that skill in a P12 classroom at the level expected of any entry-level teacher. For this specific example, a student teacher needs to demonstrate a pattern of using data to design instruction and assessment, as well as evidence of the use of contemporary tools for collecting and organizing that data. Remember, the definitions for many terms, such as data-informed decision and contemporary tools, can be found in the glossary. Finally, a score of 3 represents a level of performance beyond what is expected for a beginning teacher. It is anticipated that a student teacher will earn few, if any, 3s. Similar to the Ohio Teacher Performance Evaluation rubric for practicing teachers, a score of 3 should be reserved to highlight individual strengths. A score of 3 indicates the student teacher excels in that area beyond entry-level performance. This would be a student teacher at a rock star level of performance. For each row, the Very Apt student teaching form uses operational, detailed, and descriptive criteria to describe the expectations for student teachers' performance. Please note, as you read across the row, the italicized wording helps to identify levels of performance across the row. Italics indicate what is distinct or has changed from adjacent columns. For example, in this row, does not check for understanding is italicized in the does not meet expectations column. In the emerging column, inconsistently checks for understanding is italicized to emphasize the change between a level 0 and a level 1. Another way the Very Apt student teaching form differentiates between scores is the use of and or statements within the operational criteria for each level of performance. This designation is used when rows have multiple descriptors within each level. For example, look at Learning Targets and Directions in the Planning section of the Pedagogy rubric. This row addresses how student teachers communicate expectations to students, which include articulating both learning targets and directions for activities. Earning a score of 0 indicates the student teacher either does not articulate learning targets or does not provide directions or explanations. Given the and or in a cell with a 1 score, there are several scenarios where a student teacher may earn that score. For example, the student teacher may articulate an accurate learning target, but inaccurate directions. Another possibility would occur if a student teacher attempts to articulate learning targets and conveys inaccurate directions. Note that the and or between descriptors is italicized and indicates a change from or at the does not meet expectation level. Remember, a student teacher must provide evidence for all descriptors in a level of performance in order to earn that column rating. For example, in order to meet expectations and earn a score of 2, a student teacher must demonstrate consistent effectiveness in articulating accurate learning targets, articulating accurate directions, and sequencing learning experiences appropriately. Therefore, if a student teacher consistently communicates accurate directions for activities to learners and sequences learning experiences appropriately, but does not communicate accurate learning targets, he or she should not earn a 2 for this row. Let's examine the materials and resources row. The choice and use of materials and resources is judged by how those materials and resources align to the learning objectives of the lesson. When moving through the scores, we see that a score of 0 is given when the material and resources do not align to the learning objectives. For example, if a student teacher is working on decoding with second grade learners, but is consistently using 5th grade reading level texts, a score of 0 would be appropriate. In the emerging category, the language changes to aligns with some, where the student teacher inconsistently provides some grade level texts and some inappropriately high or low level texts. In this case, the student teacher would earn a score of 1. When you look at the column for meets expectations, notice the use of italicized font. The font emphasizes the difference for level 2. Here, the student teacher's materials and resources align with all of the learning targets. Therefore, this descriptor refers to a student teacher who is regularly, meaning almost every day, selecting appropriate grade level text to read with learners in his or her classroom. To earn a score of 3, a student teacher's materials not only must consistently align with all of their learning objectives, but must also consistently show evidence that the materials encourage individualization of learning. For this level of performance, a student teacher would select texts that are all appropriate reading level, but with slightly varying difficulties within the grade level to challenge competent learners to extend their thinking and provide learners who are struggling with texts that will allow them to be successful. Further individualization might look like a student teacher choosing texts that engage a variety of learners based on specific individual interests. Notice some cells, namely exceeds expectations and meet expectations, include enumerated lists. Treat rows with these type of lists as if they were implied ands in between each number. Therefore, student teachers are expected to meet all components in the list to earn that score. If a student teacher fulfills all but one of the enumerated components, they cannot earn the score and must be scored at the level below. For example, if the student teacher did fulfill number 1 and align with all objectives, and they fulfilled number 2 by making content relevant, but did not fulfill number 3 by encouraging individualization of learning, then the student teacher must be rated at a 2, despite fulfilling most of the requirements for a 3. To evaluate a student teacher on the rubric, raters, which include student teachers, university supervisors, and mentor teachers, should use specific evidence to support the score. Evidence includes observing the student teacher working in the classroom, supervisors and cooperating teachers giving feedback, and the student teacher's own reflection and notes on lessons. When using the form, remember to review the VariApp Looks For document in the supplementary materials to identify possible sources of evidence and examples of performance. In this module, we discussed how the VariApp student teaching form is organized and scored. We talked about the scale from 0 to 3, where 0 represents skills in which a student teacher has not engaged or consistently struggles, and 3 being reserved for the student teacher's strengths and where he or she exceeds expectations. We also discussed how to use the language of the descriptions, i.e., italicized font and/or statements, to differentiate between levels of performance. To test your understanding of the organization and scoring of the VariApp student teaching form, we will ask you some additional questions about the content presented in this module. The following post-quiz will help you gauge your understanding of the objectives and content addressed in this module. Please answer each question. To receive credit for this module, you must answer at least 4 of the 5 questions correctly. Upon submitting your answers, you will receive immediate feedback, and you will be able to view the correct answers for each question. If you do not pass the first time, review the module content and attempt the quiz again.